To fathom hell or go angelic, just take a pinch of psychedelic. Hi everyone, my name is Sailor, and this is a review of How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. So in this review, I'm going to go over what this book is about, why I decided to read this book, what I like most about this book and which parts I enjoyed the most, and who I recommend this book for. So this book covers the history, neuroscience, and value proposition of psychedelic drugs such as LSD and psilocybin mainly, and there's also a little bit of discussion about MDMA and 5-MeO-DMT, which is derived from some plants and the Sonoran desert toad. So the first part of this book dives into the history of LSD and psilocybin, starting all the way back in 1938 with Albert Hofmann and how he accidentally undertook the world's first acid trip, and culminating in 1970 when it was made illegal and driven underground for various reasons. Along the way, he talks about some really eclectic, interesting characters such as Al Hubbard and Timothy Leary. Michael Pollan also documents his personal psychedelic experience with LSD, psilocybin, 5-MeO-DMT, and really tries to encapsulate these experiences into words. The latter half of the book is my favorite. It includes some really fascinating research and studies being done at Johns Hopkins University and NYU. They look at the effects of psychedelic drugs, LSD and psilocybin, on people suffering from depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorders, and even existential distress that they find in cancer patients and those suffering terminal illnesses or facing imminent death. But another interesting part is that it also looks at the effects of psychedelics on healthy normals, or others that may not have a mental illness that's affecting them at the moment and otherwise would be considered healthy, normal people. So I decided to pick up this book because I really think that drugs are fascinating, especially psychedelic drugs. From a biochemical standpoint, it's pretty amazing to think that such small molecules can change your perspective on the world, really, and give you such a new outlook. Another reason I decided to pick it up is because I also enjoy psychology books written by people like Daniel Kahneman, like Thinking Fast and Slow. I think those are great books that teach you a lot about how your brain works and all the biases that you're subject to on a daily basis that you don't even recognize. And I think that this book and psychedelics in general is a very natural detour from that path. The third reason I decided to pick up this book is because I have tremendous respect for anybody that decides to take on such a touchy subject or stand by beliefs that may not be popular. And for Michael Pollan to do this much research and put his personal experiences on the line and really his reputation as an author, I think that means that this book's worth the read. You know, if anybody's willing to stand by their beliefs like that and put themselves at risk for public rebuke, then they have my respect and they also have my attention. So to be totally clear, this book is awesome. I really enjoyed it cover to cover. The history is really interesting. His personal experiences were really interesting. But my favorite part all came from the neuroscience parts of the book. For example, my favorite part of the book was when Pollan talks about Robert Carhart Harris's entropic brain theory. The entropic brain theory basically says that all mental states fall on a spectrum. There's the low entropy side of the spectrum and the high entropy side of the spectrum. The low entropy side of the spectrum is characterized by mental states that have too much order, an excess of order. This characterizes mental states such as depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, and even Alzheimer's, and at the far end, a coma. These types of mental states are ones that cannot change. You know, they're very rigid. Imagine if you're depressed. You know, it's an endless cycle of self-rumination. Like, you just keep beating yourself up and you keep thinking about things you did wrong and you can't get out of that, and it just keeps going and going and going. The same goes for when you're anxious. All you can think about is the future. All you can think about is this thing that you don't want to mess up. And as you can see, it gets worse and worse. You know, Alzheimer's is the complete deterioration of the mind. Same with a coma. Coma is, well, coma. On the opposite end of the spectrum, on the high entropy side, you have mental states that are characterized by an absence of order. This is like chaos. And on this side, you can think of mental states such as schizophrenia or psychosis. And here's the kicker: people on high-dose psychedelics and children. So yes, the entropic brain theory is basically saying that schizophrenics, people suffering from psychosis, people on high-dose psychedelics, and children share a similar mental state, and that mental state is chaos. In this theory, they also talk about how this relates to the default mode network, which is a part of the brain that I didn't even know existed, but that is apparently responsible for, you know, your ego, your sense of self, and your really ability to distinguish between you and the rest of the world and other people. And essentially, they're exploring how psychedelics can be of real value for people on the low entropy end of the spectrum, that if they were able to see what a high entropy mental state looks like, it may be very beneficial to them. Psychedelics are to the study of the mind what the microscope is to biology and the telescope is to astronomy. I love that quote. It's bold. Another thing I really enjoyed about this book were the philosophical parts and all the philosophical connections that Michael Pollan makes. So much of human suffering stems from having this self that needs to be psychologically defended at all costs. We're trapped in a story that sees ourselves as independent, isolated agents acting in the world, but that self is an illusion. It can be a useful illusion when you're swinging from the trees or escaping from a cheetah or trying to do your taxes, but at the system's level, there is no truth to it. This quote is really profound, and it's basically saying the same thing that Buddhism says, which is that the root of all human suffering stems from trying in vain to please something that really is insatiable and impossible to please. And that thing is your ego. It's your sense of self that will never, ever let you just settle down and finally be happy. No matter what happens, it'll always ask for more. It'll always push you farther, harder to try and increase your standard of living or get you to have more friends, or feel like you're more appreciated. But fact of the matter is, it is insatiable. And looking back at that quote, it's an illusion. It's just a part of your brain that is there for survival, because without it, we probably wouldn't be doing very well as a species. But it's also a huge source of suffering. And I'm sure that many people are familiar with that concept. We know these things from reading books, and we know these things from watching YouTube videos or just being generally aware of what, Buddhism says. But it's one thing to know, and it's another thing to understand. There are plenty of things that we know, yet until we understand them, we don't really truly implement them in our lives or learn the lessons that we should have learned a long time ago. And this is one of the main value propositions behind psychedelics. It really has the ability to not only let us know these things, but to truly understand it, and even if only temporarily, to feel it as if it were true. And by it here, I mean an egoless existence. A sense of self without all of this constant worry and fear and really just ruthless self-reflection that we do on a daily basis, and to simply be able to live and observe without that companion voice in your head incessantly nagging you all the time. There's a lot more in this book that I enjoyed. The role that psychedelics played in Silicon Valley and in the design and engineering of all of the technology that we enjoy today is fascinating. Schwartz said that several of the early computer engineers relied on LSD in designing circuit chips, especially in the years before they could be designed on computers. You had to be able to visualize a staggering complexity in 3 dimensions, hold it all in your head. They found that LSD could help. I strongly recommend this book for a number of people. The first is people that have experience with psychedelics. I would also recommend this book for people that haven't tried psychedelics but are curious about them. If you want a nearly comprehensive look at all the history back in the 1930s all the way to the 1970s and all of the neat characters involved and all the people that started the movement and the counterculture leading up to the Vietnam War, this is for you. If you've been curious about the neuroscience behind psychedelic drugs, you've heard that they're maybe dangerous or they rot your brain or something like that, or you've always just been curious about how indeed they do affect the human mind, this book is for you. I would also say that this book is great for people that enjoy reading about neuroscience and psychology in general. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a natural segue from books like Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman or other psychology and neuroscience books. But overall, this is an awesome book and definitely worth the read. If you like this video, then hit the like and subscribe button so you know when I post future videos.